Today, we're jumping into a fantastic piece of medical detective work. Researchers noticed this really troubling trend with breast cancer, and by digging deep into our genetic code, they've uncovered this huge clue that could totally change how we screen for and treat the disease in a very specific group of young women. So, the whole story kicks off with a pretty startling observation. Doctors in China are seeing more and more cases of breast cancer in women who are just, well, much younger than you'd expect. And this isn't just a feeling they had. The data shows a really significant pattern that honestly just begged for an explanation. And this really shows you the scale of the problem. In China, the median age for a breast cancer diagnosis is about 47. But in Western countries, it's over 57. We are talking about a full decade of difference, maybe even more. And when you see a gap that big, you just know something fundamental is going on. And chances are, it's probably tied to our genetics. Now, usually when you think about hereditary breast cancer, two genes pop into your head, right? BRCA1 and BRCA2. And they are super important. But here's the thing, they're not the whole story. They only explain about half of all the hereditary cases. So for that other half, the cause is basically a big question mark. And that's the knowledge gap these scientists wanted to fill. So, since the usual suspects were already ruled out for a lot of these patients, researchers turned their focus to a different, really powerful gene. It's a gene called TP53, and it has a very fitting nickname, the guardian of the genome. So what does this guardian gene actually do? Well, think of it as one of your body's most important bodyguards against cancer. It's constantly on patrol. If it spots a cell with damaged DNA, it'll either fix it or it'll tell that cell to basically self-destruct before it can turn into cancer. It's a critical safety switch. But what happens if that switch is broken? Well, when that TP53 gene is faulty, it can lead to this absolutely devastating condition called Li-Fraumeni syndrome. People with this have a massively increased risk of getting all sorts of cancers, and often at a really young age. We're talking early-onset breast cancer, sarcomas, brain tumors, the whole gamut of aggressive diseases. So the takeaway here is, finding a TP53 mutation, that's a very big deal. Okay, so armed with all this knowledge, the researchers launched this super focused investigation. They went on a hunt for these rare TP53 mutations, but they did it inside a very, very specific group of patients. The study zeroed in on almost 1,500 young Chinese women. And here's the critical part. Every single one of them had been diagnosed with breast cancer at or before the age of 40. And they had all already tested negative for those common BRCA mutations. This was so clever because it filtered out all the known genetic causes, letting them hunt for the unknown ones. And what they found was just remarkable. It wasn't just one single thing, but this series of connections that pieced together a clear, really actionable pattern that was hiding there in the data all along. Now, at first glance, the overall number seems pretty small. Across that entire group of almost 1,500 women, less than half of 1% had a harmful TP53 mutation. So yeah, it confirms it's rare, but the story definitely doesn't stop here. This is where it gets really interesting. When they started slicing the data by age, a pattern emerged. Check this out. For women diagnosed at age 30 or younger, the rate suddenly jumps to 1.9%. That's 4 times higher than the overall group. This was the first major clue. The younger the patient, the more likely it was that this TP53 gene was involved. But even that wasn't the whole picture. The researchers had a hunch there was another piece to this puzzle. And it turned out the most important link wasn't just when the cancer showed up, it was what kind of cancer it was. And here it is, the big aha moment. When they looked specifically at women aged 35 or younger who had a type of cancer known as HER2-Positive, which is a particularly aggressive form, the prevalence of TP53 mutation shot up to 2.3%. This was it. This was the specific high-risk group they were looking for. And to really put that in perspective, look at this. The mutation rate in this very specific subgroup, young HER2-positive patients, is more than 10 times higher than in everybody else in the study. This is no longer a random search in the dark. It's like a giant flashing neon sign pointing to exactly who needs to be tested. This is a pedigree chart from one of the families in the study, and it just makes all that data feel incredibly personal. The arrow points to the patient. She had a bone sarcoma at 17 and then breast cancer at 33. Her father also had a related cancer. This is the real-world impact of a single faulty gene being passed down, and it's exactly why identifying these families is so critical. So you can see, this isn't just some interesting finding for a science journal. This discovery led directly to a powerful clinical recommendation that could genuinely save lives. The study's conclusion is just so direct and clear. They say, based on this evidence, we should be prioritizing TP53 genetic testing for HER2-positive breast cancer patients who are 35 or younger. It's a perfect example of using data to make healthcare smarter and way more precise. So what does that actually look like for a patient? Well, a positive test changes pretty much everything. First, it helps doctors make treatment decisions, since radiation can actually be risky for TP53 carriers. Second, it can guide surgical choices, maybe pushing a patient toward a more aggressive mastectomy to cut down future risk. And, maybe most importantly, it alerts family members who might also have the mutation, so they can start cancer screening early. So the bottom line is this. What started as a really broad statistical puzzle, these younger diagnoses in China, has been drilled down to a concrete, actionable step. For one very specific group of patients, a simple genetic test can provide absolutely life-altering information, both for them and for their entire family. And this leaves us with a final really big question, doesn't it? This whole study is a perfect example of what we call precision medicine. By finding a small, high-risk group, we can use our best tools way more effectively. It really makes you wonder, as we get better and better at reading our own genetic blueprints, what other complex diseases could be unraveled and managed by finding just the right group to test.